What we'd like to look at today is how to design an experiment and what are the aspects of an experiment that are needed. So first we want to look at some more definitions. And so when we look at it, the experimental units are the individuals that are studied. So think about experimental units as either being the people that are taking a certain type of medicine, maybe the crops in a field, because those can be experimental units. It could be just about anything. Sometimes, especially when it's talking about people, they're also called subjects. So in other words, the subjects of our study. So the experimental units could be what happens to fruit flies when we do a certain thing to them. Maybe we keep them in cold temperatures, or maybe we keep them in warmer temperatures and incubate them. Maybe we put them in some type of other gas or something. But in other words, who are we looking at? Who are we talking about? Who are we changing the subject of? Okay. So the outcome that we want or are looking for is also called the response. And this is what is being measured on each experimental unit. So think about some of the medical studies. Maybe our outcome is their blood pressure. Did it increase? Did it decrease? When we're talking about crops and everything, did we have a higher yield? Was our produce larger this year versus last year? Those are some of the outcomes that we look for. The treatment are the procedures that are applied to the experimental unit. There are usually 2 or more treatments. Actually there have to be 2 or more treatments, because think about it, you have to have what we consider the control, and then you have to have what you actually changed about that control. So for instance, and I apologize, I keep going back to medication because many students and everything are going into the nursing field or the healthcare profession. So thinking about clinical trials, experiments, things of that nature, one group gets maybe a placebo, the other group gets the actual medication. Or one group gets medication A, the other group gets medication B. If we want to talk about whenever we're working with maybe machinery or creating steel or something like that, this one gets, in the process, this one is heated to one temperature. The other one is heated to a different temperature. In other words, we have to have something to compare it to begin with. That's why there's 2 or more treatments, so that we can choose the best outcome that we are looking for. One of the best things that we look at is a randomized experiment. Whenever we're talking about randomized experiment, this is where you assign a treatment to a specific experimental unit. Okay, this is whenever we look at medical research and we say, okay, group A is going to receive medication A. Group B is going to receive medication B. We observe the results, but we have selected which group is going to get what treatment. This is where it is called an experiment, a randomized experiment. We want them to be randomized because we do not want any type of bias to be involved in our program. The other type of study that we look at is what we call an observational study. In observational studies, you do not get to select which group gets the treatment, okay? This is more like your life-based experiment type. Think about psychology experiments, or still even in the medical profession. So a psychology experiment observes what happens when students interact with each other, or how they react to a teacher or the thunderstorm or anything like that. At my house right now, I'm having a little bit of observational experiment or observational study because I see how my dog reacts on sunny days versus stormy days. Also, if there's any other outside variables that we want to look at. Observational studies, again, you cannot select which subject gets the treatment. This is like saying group A is going to smoke, group B is not going to smoke. What happens to their blood pressure? Okay? This is an observational study because you cannot go up to somebody and say, you must smoke, you cannot smoke. They've made a choice as to whether they're going to smoke or not. And you can observe the effects of the smoke or the outcomes, but you cannot make it to where different people smoke. Also, when we're talking about fitness levels, you cannot say, you must exercise, you cannot exercise. Okay? These are more lifestyle choices that we look at whenever we're talking about observational studies. One observational study that a colleague did was they went out, sat on a bench in a park, and observed what happened when a person would sneeze. Did they cover their mouth? Did they not cover their mouth? Okay. You can't tell somebody you must cover your mouth for this study. Number one, you can't even tell them that they have to sneeze at a certain time. But all you can do is observe the reactions, their effects, that type of thing. In a randomized experiment, on the other hand, you get to control, again, this person gets this treatment, this person gets another treatment. Plants. This plant gets sunlight, this plant does not get sunlight. That is a randomized experiment because you control that. On both of these, you are observing the results. It depends on, do you get to select who's in which group? If you cannot select who's in which group, then it's an observational study. And those observational studies are more like your lifestyle changes or your lifestyle effects, choices, that type of thing. So let's look at example 10. A medical researcher wants to determine whether exercising can lower blood pressure. At a health fair, he measures the blood pressure of 100 individuals and interviews them about their exercise habits. He divides the individuals into two categories: those whose typical level of exercise is low, and those whose level of exercise is high. Is this a randomized experiment or an observational experiment? So right here, you're at a health fair. Have you been told you must exercise, you cannot exercise prior to this? No. This researcher is literally just interviewing you and saying, what are your exercise habits? They did not say, you must exercise, you cannot exercise. Therefore, this is an observational experiment. Because all you're doing is observing what they did, whether they exercised or they didn't, and what their blood pressure is. Okay? Now then, example 11. An agricultural scientist wants to determine the effect of fertilizer type on the yield of tomatoes. There are 4 types of fertilizer under consideration. She plants tomatoes on 4 plots of land. Each plot is treated identically except for receiving a different type of fertilizer. So what are the treatments to the different groups? Okay, the treatments are the different types of fertilizer. And so whenever we look at this, can you select which field gets which fertilizer? If you can, it's going to be a randomized experiment. If you cannot, it's an observational. And in this case, this is a randomized because of the fact that you do get to select field A gets the fertilizer from Miracle-Gro. Field B gets the store brand fertilizer from, say, Lowe's. Field C gets the fertilizer that the county gives them. Field D gets the fertilizer from, say, Home Depot, the store brand. So you got to control which field got which fertilizer. This makes it a randomized experiment. An experiment is considered double-blind if neither the investigator or the subjects know who has been assigned to which treatment. Double-blind experiments are extremely important in the healthcare because you do not want the patients to be treated differently. So if the doctor knows patient A received the placebo and patient B received the medication, you do not want like leading questions or anything of that nature to affect your outcome. Therefore, when assigned to groups like this, many times, especially if it's about a medication, the doctor or maybe the nurse or something like that does not know which patients received which one, which is actually a good thing because, again, there cannot be any other bias or anything of that nature. Also, the subjects do not know which one they received. I mean, if you know that you received the placebo, you know it's not probably gonna work, therefore why even try? Whereas if you think you might have received the medication, there are actual studies that prove that sometimes the psychological effect of thinking you received a medication can improve your overall health. It's like that positive attitude type thing. Happens in the class. If you think you can do something, you're more likely to be successful than when you go into a math class saying, I'm no good at math, I'm never going to be good at math, I hate math. That right there, that mentality actually sets you up for failure. Not necessarily that you're going to fail, but you're going to struggle more than some of those students that say, yes, I can learn this, I just may not have learned it yet. Okay? Now, a confounder, and I'm misspelling this, a confounder is a variable that is related to both the treatment and the outcome. These are things that we do not control, really. these are items that come into play, and they can have effects on our outcome that we're expecting, and therefore it has effects on our treatment group. So let's think about different medications. The different medications do not affect everybody the same way. For example, males and females, they automatically have different hormones and hormone levels. Therefore, the medication may work differently on a male than it does on a female. You can't control whether you're male or female, but it does have that other effect of it. Just like age can also have an effect of it. Those that are older may have one result than those that are younger. These are confounder variables because they affect our outcome, even though they're not something that we assign to a patient or anything. So what I'd like for you to do is look at the different types of variables and experiments and see if you can select, is this a randomized or is this a observational study? And try to identify some of the confounder variables that may come into effect. Let me know if you have any questions.